Good morning. I'm Lisa, and I'd like to welcome you this morning to our worship service here at Christ Church. We're a reconciling congregation, and as you can see from our graphic this morning, we are progressive theologically also. A few announcements this morning. I just want to draw your attention to a few housekeeping issues first. Our offering, we do offering a little differently here. Our offering plates are in the back, so please feel free to place your offering in the offering plates anytime during the service. Our coffee hour this morning is out here to your right. All the way to your right, just keep making right-hand turns and you'll come to the room where there's snacks and coffee after worship, where we'd love to have you join us for fellowship. And speaking of fellowship, we'd like you, if you feel inclined, to fill in the information on the pew pads that you'll see in the pews, because we'd like to get you know you better, and we want to invite you into deeper connection if you are interested. In the bulletin are the announcements for today and ongoing next week. Please note there's a couple important dates coming up. Sunday, January 29th, is a special charge conference right after church to consider our new governance structure. Then Saturday, February 11th, if you're interested, we have a video chat with Reverend Trey Hall, who is our coach for the 2020 Connection. And you can put that information also on the pew pads if you're interested in participating in that. Marilyn Blanc would like me to mention that we have some openings for altar flowers, specifically next Sunday, January 29th, and many Sundays in February. I think that covers everything. And now Christine would like to speak about the Super Bowl that's coming up.
You go. I'm Marty Swords Farrell, and I'm the pastor here. And we are a family, and next Sunday after the special charge conference, which will be right here in this room, we're going to be having a baby shower for one of our young women, Nisha. So here's a couple of things that you might want to know. First of all, Melissa and Anna, wave your hand, Anna. Everybody knows Melissa and Anna. Melissa's in the nursery, that's why I'm pointing over there, are coordinating the shower. And there is a sign-up sheet on the office window. If you would please look at it today, since it's next week, the event is next week. There are options for you to help with setup and cleanup and some other things on there. But she's also, Nisha is registered at Target and also at Babies R Us. So you can go to one of those two places and find out what she still needs for her baby, who is going to be born in a couple of weeks, not very long from now. So we're excited to give this young woman a lot of love, and her baby as well. And there will be pizza for the shower, and it's kind of a good time of celebration for us. Anything else I should mention? Donations for the pizza would be welcome. Anything else, Anna? So that's next Sunday after the church conference.
If anybody has questions, feel free.
Yeah, questions, ask Anna or Melissa.
Tech, could you roll my clip?
This is really boring. Hey,
Hi, Brittany.
do you want to play some football?
Yeah, I'll play. Where do you want to meet? Okay, great. I'll call Tim. Bye. Hi, Tim. You want to play football?
Maggie, hi. Okay, I'll meet you there. I'll call Jeff and Tim also.
Hello. Hi, Tim. Play football? Hold on. Hey, Tim!
Here I am. Oh.
Tim wants to know if you want to play football.
Sure.
Okay, we'll be there. Maggie, go home!
Hot one!
Hey, let's go to the Super Bowl! Yeah! You can donate soup and some dry goods.
You could also donate money if you like.
All donations will go to local food pantries.
And help other people in need.
We need all donations on Super Bowl Sunday!
So that was a little throwback clip for you. That was a video directed by Alice Rose. I don't even know how many years ago, except that my children are now 18 and 21. And they're much younger in that video. So yeah, 18 is now the minimum age of the children in that video. So ignore that last frame, which said we need your donations by Super Bowl Sunday on February 7th, because this year's Super Bowl is on February 5th. If you don't know what the Super Bowl, S-O-U-P-E-R, is, it is a chance to extend our celebration of football and also donate some much-needed non-perishables to food pantries. They tend to get low just after the holidays. So you see my football box here, which will be up front through Super Bowl Sunday. If anybody would like to donate non-perishable goods, please put those in there. Or if you do choose to donate money that will then be donated to the food pantry, just please designate that on an envelope or on a check. Thank you.
And now, let's begin a time of reflection to get us ready for worship. This week, we are going to be reflecting on the third point of progressive Christianity. By calling ourselves progressive Christians, we mean we are Christians who seek community that is inclusive of all people, including but not limited to conventional Christians and questioning skeptics, believers and agnostics, women and men, those of all sexual orientations and gender identities, those of all classes and abilities. can sing, Draw the Circle Wide. It's in the Worship and Song book on page, it's number 3154, or you will see the words up on the screen.
Good morning. Today's scripture comes from Luke chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to share a meal in the home of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, they were watching him closely. Then Jesus said to the person who had invited him, "When you host a lunch or dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers and sisters, your relatives, or rich neighbors. If you do, they will invite you in return, and that will be your reward. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, crippled, lame, and blind, and you will be blessed because they can't repay you. Instead, you will be repaid when the just are resurrected." When one of the dinner guests heard Jesus' remarks, he said to Jesus, "Happy are those who will feast in God's kingdom."
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Well, it was a historic weekend, wasn't it, for us in these United States? Friday with the inauguration of a new president, and Saturday with women's marches. Here they were on 7 continents, so quite an unprecedented event. And I'm very aware that some folks got much more excited about Friday than Saturday, and other folks got much more excited about Saturday than Friday. And it's just true that even within the household of faith, what one finds comforting, someone else might find quite challenging. And what another finds quite challenging, another might find quite comforting. But I think all of us can be challenged and are challenged and also comforted by this third point that we are lifting up today in our 8 points of progressive Christianity as we continue on this series that will take us through the end of February. So let's read it again together. By calling ourselves progressive Christians, we mean, on the front of the bulletin now, we are Christians who seek community that is inclusive of all people, including, but not limited to, conventional Christians and questioning skeptics, believers and agnostics, women and men, those of all sexual orientations and gender identities, those of all classes and abilities. So this is our charge for today, and I want us to consider it and think about it a little bit. So that very first point, that we are to seek community. What do you think of when somebody asks you, are you seeking community? We seek all kinds of things. We seek employment. We seek relationships with significant others. We seek a social life. We seek the basics of life. What are we doing when we seek community? What do you think? Any ideas? I didn't bring a microphone down with me, so I'll repeat if you say something. Neighbors. That's a good word. Think about your neighbors. Do we even know our neighbors? Years ago, everybody knew everybody in the neighborhood. It's not so much true now, but some of us probably do. What else? What are we doing when we seek community? Companionship. Yes. That is something everyone needs. If you look at good old Maslow, the psychiatrist years ago, who made a hierarchy of human needs, that's really close to the top. We need people to share acceptance. I think that's a huge one. Absolutely. Helping each other. Absolutely. And we saw some of that this past week for a celebration of Martin Luther King Day. Anybody else? I don't want to leave anybody out. Connection. Connection's a very good quality to have as we seek community, and it's not as easy to find as we might think sometimes. To find those connections with others. It takes time, doesn't it? We have to invest time. I didn't hear anyone say that when we seek community with others, it's important for us all to agree. Or I didn't hear anyone say that it's important for one to try to convince or convert the other. I don't see that in here. So that makes it, in some ways, a little more challenging, maybe? Because someone said acceptance. I think I would say that seek community begins with accepting others exactly as they are. Even if you were to try to convince them of something, you have to start with where they are. Amen? The closest New Testament word to community, I would say, is koinonia, which is one of the favorite words of the Apostle Paul. He uses it a lot in his letters, especially in the beginning of Philippians, when he talks about, it can be translated fellowship, like we have a fellowship hall. It's a place where we invite lots of people in, don't we, Curtis? All week. Tuesdays, you could go upstairs and seek community with some of our low-wage workers in here in this neighborhood, and some people who may be down on their luck. And all you have to do is what? They'll feed you, the folks from First Baptist, and sit down and just have a conversation. That's why we call it the fellowship hall. The other translation of koinonia is partnership. So that more connotes something where you're working on something together. And I know a lot of organizations like Habitat, for instance, rely on that kind of partnership where you make relationships through doing something together. I know you all were doing that yesterday at the Scarf Project. We've been taking up residence at a table at the farmer's market during the Saturdays in January. So next Saturday's the last time for this time, where I wasn't able to be there yesterday, but I know it went on, and scarves were made, and people walked by, and good conversations happened, and that's a partnership over a particular project. We're trying to offer warm, cozy things for people who are cold this time of year. So Jesus says, not just, of course we accept people as they are, but in this scripture that Paul just read, he says, invite them to dinner. And you notice where he is at dinner when he says this. He's at the dinner at the home of a Pharisee. So he's already sitting down to eat with someone with whom in most of the Gospels there's a kind of a back and forth and sometimes even a quite rocky relationship between Jesus and the Pharisee. So he hasn't sat down with his best friends, does he? Has he? He has, and he has some startling suggestions for us that you don't invite your neighbors or your relatives who are just going to reciprocate. Isn't that always a temptation? I think that's something that's still true now. It's just a temptation. It's more comforting, isn't it? Just to sit down with and socialize with people who already agree with us, who already get us, who kind of dress like us, similar educational backgrounds, similar economic background, look like us, smell like us. It's easy to form relationships, or easier. Not easy to form relationships at any time now because everybody's so busy all the time, but it's a challenging, I think this is a challenging lesson, one that really makes us think. These dining instructions remind me of a line also from the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what good is that? I think what he might be trying to say is that our aim in life is to create more love in the world. So if it's just a closed loop where you just keep loving the same people who already love you, what is the net result of that going round and round and round? Bonhoeffer had a quote that is very challenging to me, and I have to read it every once in a while. True Christian community is found in the place where the person you least likely to be with always is. And that's something that, we have to think about. Some of us went to the Women's March at the National Women's Rights Park this weekend in Seneca Falls. I brought a car full over there. And we spent the night, Friday night, at my cousin's house in Syracuse and my brother's house, two different spots. But I was up at my cousin's, and the guest room has a bathroom that's quite good size, and all the walls are mirrors. So I've stayed in this guest room many times, but it's always a shock to me when I get up in the morning and I'm kind of groggy, not awake, run the water, splashing water on my face, and I look up and there's this gal splashing water on her face, looking at a gal behind her splashing water on her face, was looking at a gal in front of her, and it's an infinite regress. It's like waking up immediately to a hall of mirrors, and I'm never ready. It's like, maybe when I was 17 it would have been a little easier. But I think that's what life can be like for us now, in the year 2017. It's because of the internet. I mean, God bless the internet. I use it every minute, right? Google, what about, But sometimes the internet can be a temptation because it can kind of have a hall of mirrors or a closed circle or an echo chamber kind of effect. You choose whatever metaphor works for you. On the left or on the right, where we are tempted only to talk to people and hear from sites and research sites that already confirm what we already think. And round. And that's, you know what? I'm meddling now. Am I meddling or what? But that's something I think that Jesus would have a problem with if he's got this advice about inviting folks to dinner. Don't just invite your brothers, sisters, relatives, rich neighbors. Go out into the highways and the hedgerows and find the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. And just having them there with you will bless you. Don't even think about another reward, because you're going to learn something from them. You're going to learn something. You get out of that little closed loop, and you'll stop just going round and round, and the hall of mirrors will not be in place. So I think both the point of the 8 points that we're looking at today, this third point about seeking community that is inclusive, and Jesus' teaching here are both antidotes kind of to that closed circle. They really challenge us and invite us to break the circle, to break our habits, to get out of our comfort zone, to stretch ourselves, to be with folk, and to have relationships with folk whose experience might be quite different from ours. And that's a very wonderful blessing once we decide to invest in it. We are invited to seek community with people of different backgrounds and beliefs, not to convince or convert them, but simply to be in relationship with them, to continue to draw the circle wide so that it begins more and more to look like the kingdom of God. Did you know, you might not know if you're fairly new here, that we're in the middle of a year-long exploration and revitalization as a congregation, and we have a coach who's been helping us. His name is the Reverend Trey Hall, and Trey lives in England, but he's originally from Memphis. And he sent us a post. He's always trying to resource us a couple of weeks ago that I thought was really helpful. And we talked about the Charge Conference next week when we're going to vote on this new governance structure, which, just a quick review, will be a group of 12 that will cover the administrative ends of the church, the finances, the trustees, and the personnel end of things. But one thing I'm hoping that we'll do as a group of 12, if this passes and once it's in place, is to start using this this practice. It's a spiritual practice that Trey sent us a couple weeks ago, and he called it, this is a blog post called A Non-Negotiable Practice for Ministry Leaders, and it's called the 1-to-1. And it's about building real, here's a quote from him, building real no BS relationships with unaffiliated people. Here's the quiz that he starts the blog post with. What is the church? And here's the four possible answers. What is the church is the question. A, relationships. B, buildings. C, money. D, my own agenda and rigidity projected onto other people and God. Want me to read those options again? A was relationships. What is the church? A is relationships. B is buildings. C is money. D is my own agenda and rigidity projected onto other people and God. What do you think? A, yes! You give that answer, he says. You give that exam, everybody gets 100. Everybody knows the right answer is relationships. But not everyone knows how to establish relationships or makes it a priority in our lives. And it's not a thing to beat ourselves up about. It's just something we can learn, we can all get better at. Even if you think you're already pretty good at it, and that's great. It's something that all of us can continue to get better at. So the rest of the blog post is specific instructions on how to do a 1-to-1, which is an in-person conversation, and the goal of which is to not find out the what, where do you work, how many people were in your family growing up, have you always lived here in Troy, what are you looking for in a church? No, none of those what questions are so important, although they'll probably come up in the conversation. What you're looking for is the why questions. The why questions are, why have you always lived here in Troy? Or why do you think it's important, if you do, to do whatever you're spending most of your time doing? Again, you're not trying to convince them of anything. Dorcas and I did some of these conversations in the early part of this revitalization process. We went over to talk to the chief of police over here next, not far away. And Annie and I went up and talked to one of the principals at school too. And it's a time to ask them for their perspective on this community, because their perspective is very important. And don't all of us sometimes get into little thought loops where we think a certain thing about our community or about our ministry opportunities in a certain spot, and it's good to hear from others. So what he's talking about, what Trey's talking about, is a relational meeting or a 1-to-1 is a brief, in-depth exploration into why someone is the way they are, what they give a damn about and why, what keeps them up at night and why, what they hope against hope for in life and why. So if you do become part of the 12 of these leaders, or even if you don't, I think it's a practice that would be helpful for us to have first with each other, but also with some others in the community, so that we begin to hear more and get out of that. I'm not suggesting we're in one, but if there is a tendency, as I think there are in many, many congregations, to make that round and round echo chamber, it's good for us to challenge ourselves as Jesus challenged us to get out of that loop. One person I didn't get to know yet in this community, and I can't do a one-on-one now with her because she's already gone and from our midst, but I wanted to lift her up today as someone who is a very good example of a lifelong practitioner of this number 3rd point of seeking community that is inclusive of all persons, was Mary Jane Smith. Did anyone here know her personally? Oh, good. I'm glad. She passed away last Sunday, January 15th, at the age of 88. And her obit was in the paper this morning. You can put her picture up now. It's a beautiful picture. She started out life, her professional life, her spiritual life, as a sister of St. Joseph, and went on to found Unity House, and then became its executive director and was for 20 years. And one of the things she talked about in the obit was how much she struggled. This was not from the obit, from another interview that the paper had done with her a few years ago. She really struggled because people wanted her to be the director. Can you find that picture? Oh, okay, no problem. Well, you can look at a beautiful picture in the paper when you get home if you get the paper, or you can look it up online. She was worried about becoming the director because she didn't want to lose contact with the folks. And that is a real danger sometimes when you head into an administrative role. You can be in your little office, you're meeting with your funders, you're meeting with your staff, and you're not in touch with the folks that you're serving. So I think that was very telling of her. I didn't know her personally. I'd love to hear some stories about her from those of you who did. But here's somebody who really gave of herself over many, many years. And Unity House is our largest social service agency here in town, and it's a wonderful anchor for many, many people in the areas of, oh, here we are. Thank you, Paul. Isn't that a great picture? I love the colors. They're just so vibrant, and she was a very vibrant person, I understand. Thank you, Paul. But, in the area of homelessness and feeding people, and they have a store, and they follow up, they have caseworkers, they do all kinds of work with people who have experienced domestic abuse. I can't even begin to, you all know, I'm sure, of many, many services that Unity House provides, not far from here, up here on 6th Ave. So our community is bereft, but also inspired by her example, Mary Jane Smith. She did marry her soulmate, the late John Lyons, back in the 70s, I think. So she left her order, but she still stayed very much true to its founding principles, and her spirituality was very strong. And again, that's another place where people can volunteer here in the community. So I just wanted to lift up Mary Jane Smith as an example of someone who always sought community, and what a lifelong blessing it brought to her, as well as the blessing that she brought to our whole community. So as a blessing, we are all a blessing to each other. And now we're going to move into a time of sharing blessing with one another and sharing peace with one another, as a time of saying the peace of Christ, or whatever words of welcome that come from your face, from your heart to another. If you want to give a hug as well, or a handshake, those are always welcome. The peace of Christ be with all of you. Beautiful. I love that song. So we're going to keep going with our theme of inclusiveness as we sing the song "A Place at the Table." It's in the little green book, number 3149, or it'll be on your screens.
Shelter of space.
Good morning. Thank you for worshiping with us at Christ Church. Nancy Bergen just let me know that she has a card for Harry. He's recovering well, but still going through physical therapy and all that, so we think a card would be a nice way to break this day. That being said, please join me in an attitude of prayer. Dear God, we have just begun a new era in our nation's history. As our President Donald Trump takes office, we ask that you give him wisdom. Give him a heart full of love and compassion for all of the people now under his care. In the same way, give us hearts full of love. Give us such an abundance of love that we can't help but reach out to people who look and think differently from us. Help us to remember that the greatest challenge you have laid out for us is not to love those we are in agreement with, but to extend our love to those whose fake Facebook posts we'd rather not read. Help us to continue the work of the church in the world through our presence and our witness. Inspire us to continue to hold our lawmakers accountable. Inspire us to continue to stand in solidarity with those Jesus was most often in ministry with, the poor, the neglected, and the exploited. Remind us that the work you have given us begins in our own community, especially with those whose names are listed in our bulletin. And finally, remind us that whenever we are intimidated by the amount of work there is left to be done, we can be strengthened by the memories of your workers from days past and by the prayer that Jesus left his disciples. The Lord's Prayer is printed on the insert in the bulletin. Please read along with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Now, as we present the gifts, we're going to sing Together We Serve, verses 3 and 4. You may remain seated. Help us to use these wisely and to use them above all to continue your work of making the world a better place for everyone that lives in it. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
For our last hymn, it's going to be only on the screens because these words didn't make it into the black hymnal, but Christine Baxter got permission for us to broadcast them. It is the same tune as you would find at 2238, but please use the words on the screen. So we're going to sing 4 verses, and then we're going to have a call to action from Mark. Christine is home recovering from a fall, so I'm going to do her part, and Gail. So whenever we're done with the 4, Mark, you can come up here, and then we'll sing the 5th verse after that. So please stand if you're ready.
People are
active, so active that he can get over here and then play the last hymn.
As we seek community, a sense of community, these are difficult times, these are polarizing times, but what if we start with what we had in common? What if we started with the outcomes that we seek, the goodness that we all seek, and we are driven by divinity, and let's see where that takes us.
Amen. I charge this congregation together as we seek to continue to live out our charge as a reconciling congregation to seek community with folk of the rainbow of sexual orientations and gender expressions, and to continue to oppose the oppression that they undergo in our name as United Methodists, and to right that wrong.
So why should we embrace those of different classes and abilities? Because it's the only way we can grow. It's the only way we can be the church and the people we want to be. I come from an advantage of being a special ed teacher for 30 years, and I always learned as much as the students did. And I also come from the advantage of being the mother of a son who is funny and smart and incredibly kind and generous, who is also in the autism spectrum and bipolar. And I am always blessed by being his mother, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow.
Amen. Thank you for those calls to action. And we'll sing the 5th verse. Go forth in peace, carrying that spirit of inclusion and of hope. Keep fighting on so that we can serve our neighbor and can continue to make this community more inclusive and life-giving place. In the name of God, creating, redeeming, and sustaining, who blesses us with his presence, with her presence, now and always. Amen.